weekly holiday worth celebrating.
Hello there, Internet. Mogwai here, and I got episode number 7 of Progress Day, and I am joined, as usual, by Panda, Paint, Swim, which I'll explain in a bit, and we have a very special guest today. His name is Steve Rubin, and he is the live design, the lead live
design lead. Yeah.
There you go. So, say hello, guys, and I'll pass the torch over to you, Panda. You do a better job at hosting than me. So,
yeah, it's great to be back. We had a bit of a missing episode last week due to various reasons, but we're back to the normal bi-weekly schedule. And I think with a very special episode, like Mogwai said, being joined by Rubin here is obviously a great, opportunity to discuss the patch and just to get some more insight from the live design lead himself. So I think very, very special for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. For those of you guys that don't know me, my name's Rubin Zoo. I am the live design lead on Legends of Runeterra. So anything you see in any patch, that's the kind of work that I do. Making life balance updates, making quality of life reworks and changes. That's what I do on the Legends of Runeterra team.
So, as you guys can tell, he is the perfect guest to have for an episode, as today we are going to be going over the most recent balance patch, and it is a big one. Very, very excited to talk about this one.
And Swim, as we can see, is missing.
Paid Swim, we got here.
Pretty important topic to cover, I think, at the beginning, and not 20 minutes later. But it is a very early start for him, usually with the timing that we record the podcast. And so we're going to have to assume he just, his alarm was malfunctioning and did not wake up.
It's all right.
So
we don't judge. It happens. I get it. It's 5 p.m. for me and for Panda, but for Rubin and for Swim, it's 8 in the morning. So, well, almost 9 now.
Yeah, so, Swim made me wake up at 8 a.m. but then he didn't even show up.
Yeah. Oh, that's
okay. It's okay. We're still doing it.
Yeah.
He may still join us as a possibility. So
exactly. Like I messaged
magically.
him. Yeah, exactly. If he wakes up, then that's the beauty of a recording, right? We'll get him in there. Regardless, Steve is a pretty busy man, and I really want to make sure we capitalize on this opportunity, as there is a lot to talk about regarding the balance patch. For those of you who watch me, and if you're watching my videos, you know that I have certain vocal opinions regarding the current state of the metagame, and I've been really, really looking forward to this balance patch, especially to address what I perceive to be issues within the Noxian region regarding direct damage, and the opportunity to have the man himself here also give us his reasoning and explain why these changes happen is going to be really interesting. So hopefully you guys are excited as I am, and without further ado, let's just get running with it.
This will be Balance Patch 1.6, which will be, coming out at the time that this video releases as well. But before we get into it, I think it'd be nice to have a little bit of backstory. Rubin, you're currently working for Riot Games. A very successful card game. It's been, I think, taken the genre by storm. It's been, critically has received, I think, just really positive reviews and just overall a good reaction in the past 6 months of the past year. And you're in a very important position for this card game. But I kind of want to know, I have some inkling, but I think a lot of viewers don't have maybe a lot of an idea. How did you get to this position, and what's kind of your backstory in CCGs in the past decade or so?
Cool. So before I was working at Riot, I was actually playing Magic professionally, which sort of happened on accident. I always played Magic since I played Magic since I was 5, so it's kind of crazy. It's like 23 years now. But I just always played Magic, and then eventually I just started stringing together out of nowhere, like some success there. Decided to sort of drop out of school and play pro Magic. And then I ended up with playing pro Magic for around 3 years. For those of you that know Magic, or if you don't, I was at the World Championships a few times. I played in, I was Platinum a few years, which is kind of the highest status that you could get, which essentially kind of stamps you as a pro player. And in that time, I also racked up, I can't remember, it's either 14 or 15 Grand Prix top 8s. So those are professional events that anybody can play in.
Yeah.
I was just playing a lot of Magic, and actually, interestingly enough, I met Travis Bose, who you guys might be familiar with Riot Dovagetes. He's like very active in the Twitch community and stuff. Because after a tournament in Hawaii, I needed a place to stay in LA, and I literally didn't know anybody in LA, and that was before I kind of made it. So this, Travis was like, "Oh, you can stay with me for an entire week," because all of a sudden I wanted to go to this Grand Prix that was in Los Angeles, like kind of on the way home. This ended up being a lot more than I expected, but Travis like put me up, and then we became really good friends. A few years after that, he's like, "Hey, we're working on this R&D project. Could you come play test it?" So me and 3 other Magic pros, Shahar Shenhar, Alexander Hain, and Jacob Wilson, flew to Riot, and we were sort of like among the first people ever to play test a Riot R&D game. And at that point, I loved the game. Actually wasn't that great at that point. We won't get into that right now. But basically, about a year after that, they offered me a full-time position as opposed to a contract position as a playtester, which I was a playtester for around a year, and I eventually transitioned into the role as the live design lead, which is where I'm at today.
Mm-hmm. And when did this start? Like the playtesting for are you allowed to say, or?
I can't remember, but I've been playing lore for, I want to say that it was like January or February in 2017. Yeah. Maybe 2018. It was 3 years ago. I can't do math. It's either 2017 or 2018. But
we'll let the viewers figure it out.
Yeah, we'll let the viewers figure it out. But the game was very rough at that point.
I can imagine.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting. I wanted to go over kind of your history, because it's not always the case for design devs in CCGs to have kind of a background in competing at a very high level as well. And I mean, you've proven it. Also, I just saw your tweet this morning. You got to #1 again on the NA ladder. So I think it's very reassuring and very comforting to see someone in charge of balance also proving that he has the skill level to understand, the game and the meta game at a very, very high level as well. So with that introduction out of the way, I think we can get right into the patch. Normally these episodes go pretty long when we go over patches because there's so much to talk about, and I think in this case even more.
But before we hop into I just want to especially clarify for people watching, because this is something that I did not know until recently. Like, what is the live design lead, right? I didn't know there was a difference between like actual design and live design. I didn't know what the difference between that was. And for people watching, basically the person in charge of live design, his role is to balance the game as it goes live, right? Unless I'm mistaken, like that's basically what you do, right? Like you fix the problems, right?
Yeah, there's more than just balance there, but yeah, that's kind of a very facetious thing where I'm the live design lead. People confuse me with the design lead, who is actually Sean Main, and we have a few different. Just to be very basic here, we have initial design, which is a sort of like, okay, what's the champion lineup? What are the set themes? We have a lot of people working on initial design, and then we have final design, which is sort of like, okay, let's turn these into archetypes, make sure they work, make sure the numbers, all the bells and whistles are ready to go. So that's final design, and then live design is what I do after cards are released. Then how do we rework them? And actually, live design is our smallest team out of, and hopefully in the future you'll see communications around what we're doing with initial and final. But yeah, I think I just want to clear the air because people say, oh, Steve Rubin's the design lead. I'm actually not the design lead. I'm the live design lead, which I understand now is like a bit confusing. But hopefully that clears that up.
It's a more reactive role, basically. You kind of react to how the community perceives or, the player rates, the win rates, and then kind of adjust things from the initial design team's work, basically, when cards come out initially. Yeah,
exactly. And a lot of the times when I'm working on live design, it's tough because I need to keep into account cards or changes that final or initial is making in the future, or if I'm changing an archetype, like recently, like for this patch we changed the discard archetype, I need to make sure I go to initial design and say like, hey, what are the initial goals for the discard archetype? So I'm making sure that my changes that actually blocks a lot of changes actually don't end up going through because it's not really akin to like what the card was supposed to do in the first place. So that's kind of how the relationship works.
Yeah, and the overarching themes of just the archetypes, maybe even like the flavor aspect of certain things, I think, would also be sometimes a problem. You can't change certain things, or it would be maybe not a clean change. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it does sound quite complex to juggle all of that. But I think you guys have done a pretty good job overall, not just you as line design, but just design team overall. Going to this balance patch, though, I want to let you give kind of a small overview over the general idea behind the patch, kind of what you wanted to do, not just specific card changes, but just with the whole patch in general.
Awesome. So yeah, so for this patch, we decided, I think I tweeted out a little while ago while we started working on the patch, that we're focusing a bit more on nerfs for this patch. Generally, while our goal isn't outright to nerf cards all the time, we do think that for this patch specifically, we're focusing on metagame health, and hopefully that'll be shown in this patch. Where normally, you know, when we nerf something, it's really because it's over from a numbers perspective, or we think it might be in the future. But for this patch, we're saying, hey, we're actually going to focus on things that are healthy for players and see long-term health in our game. So I keep using that word, but the idea is instead of saying, hey, this deck is too good, we're saying, hey, this deck is unhealthy. There's a pretty big difference, right? Yeah. And that allows us to make more nerfs than we normally would.
And all right, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think a lot of the archetypes and decks that have been pretty oppressive, let's say, in the meta have all had very similar themes with, aggro and elusives and these decks that kind of not only limit, make the actual interaction for the games you queue up into, maybe not, like you said, very healthy, but also limits a lot of deck building and deck diversity options as well. So I think the health of the meta is the big thing here, not so much the balance. And we'll go through the changes, but I think a lot of them make a lot of sense in that regard. Right away, we're going to go over the Spirit Bloom Festival, which is a month-long thematic experience featuring a new lab, event pass, special quests, and a ton of new personalization items. Not much to say about that. I know Mogwai is sometimes interested about these limited things. Any thoughts, Mogwai?
Well, it's very anime, and I like anime a lot, so I am very much looking forward to it. I like the board. Nice. I like the looks of the new battle pets, and I don't know if you guys saw the new cinematic that was pretty sweet as well. So, but now as much as I like these stuff, I definitely like the thing that I'm really eager to discuss is the changes themselves naturally for the card game, and we're gonna start off with Heimerdinger, right?
Yeah, Heimerdinger is the first change, and it is a big one. It kind of reworks him in many ways, changing around mostly the turrets that are spawned with him, the numbers, and we see that the 3-mana spells are now the Apex turret, so the Fearsome. The 4-mana spells are now Overwhelm turrets, and the Elusives, which used to be the 3-mana spells and used to interact with Flash of Brilliance and create a very dangerous board state very quickly, and sometimes in what felt like an unfair way, are now 6 mana. So you can spam them a lot less often, and they're much more kind of all your eggs in one basket because they are still very fragile at 1 health. What are your justifications, your ideas behind finally making this change after so many patches where it's been not oppressive, but definitely a very strong champion?
Yeah, the main idea here is that we want to make Heimerdinger a bit more fair and make the way to play him a bit different, because in the past, basically just spamming 3-cost spells was sort of the most efficient thing to do and could just outright kill a lot of players really quickly. So the idea here is we're changing the turrets around so that there's sort of a progression of evasion. So essentially, the more mana you spend on a spell, the better evasive keyword you'll get. So you'll start off with Fearsome at 3, then you'll start off at Overwhelm at 4, and then Elusive at 6. We really like this in testing because we found that now the Elusive turret, which is like obviously the most deadly one, is going to cost you a 6-mana spell in order to get, and then you can't really spam them, and it's much easier to interact with them. The other thing, I don't know if we'll talk about Flash of Brilliance later, but Flash of Brilliance is now going to create you an Overwhelm turret, which is really important for this design because we wanted to make sure that when your opponent does go Flash of Brilliance and spam a bunch of turrets, you could always interact right through blocking. So that's kind of why we made that adjustment.
And no, I was going to say, like, what I was mentioning earlier, because we did talk a little bit about Heimerdinger before actually recording. What I mentioned earlier is that I definitely saw like a change like this happening. I was definitely expecting it, right? Because otherwise, the ways you can change Heimerdinger are either this way or altering his stat lines or just completely redesigning him altogether, right? So I was expecting and a lot of people were also like speculating about this, like about the 3-mana and the 4-mana turrets being swapped, right? The fearsome for the elusive, but like I mentioned earlier, I like this much more. It makes the elusive turret way more exclusive, and it comes at a stage of the game in which it is much easier to answer, right? Which is fine considering that these are technically free cards that you are obtaining, right? Not only free in the sense of like card advantage, but also tempo wise too. So I really like this. I think the overwhelm, like if the elusive turret was 4 mana, it had 4 attack, it would be very easy for it to just get out of hand just as fast. Like we've seen how sometimes Solitary Monk can just take away games on her own in a way, right? That 4 attack goes a long way. So big fan of this change. Even though Heimerdinger's win rate wasn't over the top, I do believe he was in a way a very oppressive champion. And more than anything, I think the biggest issue with Heimerdinger is the sensation that you get when you face him. The fact that, you know, when your opponent curves out into Heimerdinger, into potentially multiple flashes of Brilliance, it just feels like you're put in a situation in which you either answer him immediately, and which, you know, even if you do have the answers, they can respond with the likes of Twin Disciplines, which gives you another elusive turret on top of that. So it reached this very fast-paced snowball sort of game that got out of hand really quickly. And I think this is going to be... It's going to be great moving forward. It's definitely a very good change. And even a more impactful nerf alongside Flash of Brilliance, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah, I've been complaining, I'll be honest, about, you know, Heimer and Flash for many patches.
Yeah, so have I. Well, at least when I play against it, yeah.
So I'm definitely happy to see the change as well. I think it did always feel kind of Heimer and Karma, maybe not as much now, but and also Ezreal in some ways, they felt like champions that could get you so much, like the value ceiling you can get from them in certain situations was so high that it felt in some ways unfair, or especially with Heimer, there are many ways that you just couldn't react, because even if you saved mana and saved removal spells, they had so many tools in you know, those regional colors to defend with Twin Disciples, for example, that it just made it, you know, feel just very bad overall, even though he wasn't, you know, sometimes you didn't draw him and then your deck just didn't work, or sometimes you drew him, you know, too late if you waited for that, you know, reactive mana and then you were dead already. So it wasn't OP, but it did, when it did go off, it did feel kind of bad. So I am, you know, very happy, I have to say, I'll admit. And we'll talk about Flash. We can just talk about it now, I think, Flash of Brilliance, because it is. Sorry,
let me scroll down here.
So the cost went from 3 to 4 mana. That's the kind of the big change. And if you want, you can go over the justification behind it and the idea behind.
So there was some idea of having Flash not change, considering we are nerfing Heimerdinger as well. But we had to kind of ask ourselves in terms of gameplay health, like regardless of what turret is being made, do we want there to be a situation where a player can sort of uninteractively make an arbitrary number of 3/1s? And I think for our game, the answer is actually no, because, you know, we strive on deep interactive gameplay and the idea that your decisions matter. And really, Flash being at 3 just prevented that. There was some idea of maybe moving Heimerdinger up to 6 and then leaving Flash, but I felt like that was just too much, and that would still retain that feel bad of, oh, my opponent had 2 Flashes. So yeah, the adjustment here, now they're going to make overwhelm turrets, so no matter what your opponent will be able to block, it'll be a bit harder to use, and this is of course like a really big nerf, which is unfortunate. But in terms of asking ourselves, is this healthy for the game? We think at 4 it's more healthy.
And out of curiosity, have you guys considered the possibility of making Flash of Brilliance, like before reaching this conclusion, right? Did the possibility of making it fast speed ever cross your minds?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because we'll also see that with Relentless Pursuit this patch, like spell speed changes. Generally, we don't actually use spell speed as a lever for live balance, and what I mean by that is, like, when we do balance changes, it'll be interesting when we talk about Relentless Pursuit this patch, but we don't actually normally change the speed of a card. Like when we change Unyielding Spirit to fast, that's essentially a redesign. Okay. So we didn't consider fast in this case, because created cards, we want them to be burst, because we want players to be able to use them right away. Like imagine flashing and hitting a shadow flare, but you can't cast it because the flash was fast, right?
Yeah,
and that's
I get it.
It's just fundamentally not something we want to do with flash. So hopefully that's answering both of those questions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I do believe this is definitely a tremendous nerf. I think you even reach a point in which you may question playing this even in Heimerdinger decks.
Right.
Personally,
I'm a little sad about that, but yeah.
Yeah, but I do completely agree that, and I think Panda thinks even more so of this. Like the card, in certain scenarios, the card was very toxic because of the lack of interaction, the fact that it was burst speed. There would be scenarios in which you would play Heimerdinger, and there would be games in which you would have 3 Flash Brilliances in your hand, and then all of a sudden it's just like, it's basically automatically winning the game unless your opponent happens to have like a very specific answer to that board state. So, and even then, like you're still getting, like you got all those dudes for free anyway. So even if they spend a card, they're still going down in card advantage, right? So, it definitely it just did not feel good losing to Heimerdinger because of it. And I do believe Flash of Brilliance ultimately was one of those cards that it kind of almost falls into the unyielding spirit category, in the sense that if you have to murder the card, it's kind of better to do so than to leave it as it is, right? That's my opinion, of course.
Yeah, and just because I changed the card, like you'll see with Braum in a second, I'm sure, it doesn't mean we won't go back and rechange it.
Yeah,
if we find that
that's the
Flash,
beauty. That's the
like
beauty of
cards
digital, right?
Right, cards like Claws of the Dragon, all of a sudden without Flash, like are not as good, or for whatever reason, we can always go back and make that adjustment better.
Yeah, I think it also, I mean, it's a dangerous card because obviously it was paired with Heimer. That's what made it so strong. And outside of that, in the current card set, it didn't seem to do that much more. Like you mentioned, Eye of the Dragon, that is one of the other cards that has like an interesting synergy with it. But in the future, if there are cards that benefit from, cast a spell and then get X, kind of like Eyes of the Dragon, you cast a spell, it just goes on the board, burst speed. Cards that, just overall, because it's free essentially because you're getting the mana back and you're getting a card generated as well. So you're getting card advantage back as well. It makes it so that some cards in the future would have to be designed around it the same way that Heimer has to, you have to keep it in mind as well.
Right.
So I think it's safer, at least now, to over nerf it. And then, like you said, you can look back at it, see the play rate, see how it fits in certain decks or doesn't fit, and then go back and change that if you have to. I think that's we covered most of the Heimer stuff, though. I think definitely a big change, though. We'll see how. I mean, it's been a very prevalent deck in the meta for the past 3 or 4 patches, so we'll see if finally it gets dethroned or it evolves into something different. We saw with Vi changing, and then
it's very, very interesting to see like where it's gonna end, like what the next Heimerdinger deck is. It's funny because Heimerdinger was my favorite champion back in the before the beta was released, actually, and yeah, it's crazy how it's gone a long way in that sense. But I do feel like a champion like Heimerdinger, if the metagame turns out a certain way, there is always going to be a place for him, right? He's still a very, very powerful value engine. But yeah, this is a big hit, and I definitely would be surprised to see Heimer sticking around tier 1 or even high tier 2 status for the time being. But we'll see.
Moving on, the next champion, another champion change is, like you just mentioned, and spoiled, is Braum. So he just got changed, and he became, I think, the dev team's idea with the changes to Anivia and Braum were to make them instantly playable and, make sure they were competitive, because Failure was in a very, not exactly a weak spot, but definitely like a difficult spot from the champion perspective in terms of like champions being in the spotlight instead of cards like Endure, like different archetypes. So I think you guys achieved that very, right away when the patch released. The Braum Nivea decks and all this, they became instant hits, I think, and the Crimson package as well. But we see the power for Braum going back down to 0. So I think you guys wanted to make sure, I mean, I'll let you explain if you want kind of the idea behind reverting that. Yeah,
so we definitely are pretty pleased with the results of Braum and Anivia, because like before we saw only Sejuani decks in Freljord, and now we saw not only more Freljord decks, but Braum and Anivia like being pretty hot off the presses at the last patch. So yeah, this rework is just to bump his power down 1. Like when I originally made that change, I was very nervous because Braum was in a really unique situation where he was actually a very high play rate champion. He's in a starter deck, and a lot of players just like playing him, regardless of his power level, which is obviously was a bit weak before. he was very highly played compared to his power level. Just wanted to make sure that players that had Braum still felt like it was Braum and still felt like it was worthwhile. But that one power just let him control the game way too much and made him counters to certain strategies. And I play tested this change, and I don't want to go on the record here, but I'm pretty sure that Braum will still be good without that power. Maybe you need to put a bit more work in to get, an Omen Hawk buff on him or a Take Heart buff on him to really get him going. But yeah, the idea behind this change is we're going to rein back a bit of power because we don't want him to be universally the sort of splashed into every deck, like a Demacia deck, like a Bannerman deck that plays it and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the reasoning behind the change.
I like it. I gotta say that I still am definitely more of a fan of the Braum live design approach compared to the Kalista one. Because you guys kind of like did the opposite with Kalista. Like, you started low with her, and then and you were aware that you would potentially end up buffing her in the future, but you wanted to like kind of like test the waters. But with Braum, you guys took the opposite. Like you started a bit higher, and you wanted to see how he stabilized and how how he was represented, and then you would make the decision to like slightly nerf him if that was needed. Like I think that's. Like I said, through my perspective, I just think that's a little bit better. It's more exciting, especially like with Braum. Initially, like the first few days when Braum was in this form, it was very fun to play him. Like all of a sudden, like he was just really, really strong, and you had this very underrepresented champion. I believe in your survey, Panda, Braum was like the second lowest champion regarding. Yeah, like the second lowest.
No, it was the first lowest, and
the
then
first
Anivia
lowest
was second.
Okay,
and they both became. We'll talk about the survey later, but they became pretty highly rated this last patch. So
they went from 0 to hero, and it was great. It was fresh, right? I personally agree with the nerf. I think he's with everything you said. I don't really have anything to add in that regard. But I like the approach that you guys took. Is what I wanted to say, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially with champions that have, a certain, like Braum doesn't inherently just win you games. It's not kind of the champion that just closes out games and has this huge, huge impact. I think it's okay to overshoot a bit in the balance because it's not going to be as impactful. I think as other champions, maybe Kalista, if you overshoot, she does become, because she just adds a lot of pressure, depending on what the change is. So it might be more dangerous and a riskier change overall because it could affect the meta much more. But with Braum, I think it was okay to go over, and then even then it wasn't. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't oppressive. And I think this does make sense. I think the power going back down to 0 before it levels up is just makes a lot more sense. I think, especially with the ability change, having a 3/3 spawn anyway, it's a pretty big deal anyway. Anivia, also a champion that got buffed, saw a lot of play. A new archetype was kind of formed around both Braum and Anivia, and a small nerf here, the egg form of Anivia. So after you kill Anivia, the egg form spawns until it gets enlightened. Then the health goes down from it was a 0-2 before, and it's now a 0-1.
Very, very relevant change, though. Very crucial, I think.
Yeah, this is another one of those game health changes that I mean, basically they all are, where it's like I don't think we explicitly thought that Anivia Braum was a too powerful deck, but it's more about just making sure the health of our game. In this particular instance, it's interactability, so like the ability to sort of actually disrupt what your opponent's doing. We want to make sure that, at least at its new cost, Anivia is much easier to sort of spam her out, use Rekindler to make more copies. We think there should be more counterplay to the egg, which this is a bit unfortunate for like decks that are trying to fairly play Anivia, but we really saw decks really go into the sort of like Rekindler space and not like the fair enlightenment space.
People don't like.
So that's the idea behind this change. Even though it's a pretty big nerf to her, I think she'll still once that Anivia dies and you have the egg, like once she's in the Rekindler pool, like you're already pretty happy. Giving that opponent the opportunity to maybe like get one more Anivia off the board and have more counterplay later in the game, I think is just going to be good for lore moving forward.
Yeah.
Also because usually you would remove the Anivia by challenge or a spell, and then you have to waste another spell to remove the egg as well at 2 health. But now at 1 health, it allows for cards like Whale and Make It Rain and cards that don't have to focus only on the removing Anivia. It's just a bonus for just AoE removal elsewhere. So yeah, like you said, I think it's just healthier, and it feels good when you're playing against Anivia at least. And like you said, if you're the player that's playing Anivia, it's already in the Rekindler pool. Your strategy is going to be much more like late game. You're going to win the game in a few more rounds. After that, you don't really care too much if the egg dies. So I think overall, yeah, it's just going to be a healthier change, I think.
Yeah, it will be impactful though, for sure. Like I can recall multiple scenarios in which I would have been able to deal with the egg if it had 1 health. So we're definitely gonna notice it, but I don't think it's gonna like put Anivia back where she was. She still comes onto the board at 6 mana, and she's still fantastic value engine with the Rekindler. Like you can just get so much out of that. So I love this change. I think it's fair. I don't think it's overly critical, and it's good.
So moving away from champions, those are the 3 big champion changes for this patch. We're going to move into cards now, and the first card, also already spoiled by Rubin, is a Relentless Pursuit. We were talking about the Flash of Brilliance change, or the possibility of changing it from the speed from burst to fast, and you mentioned it's not something you typically do, but in this case, there's the exception. Relentless Pursuit is being changed from fast speed down to slow speed.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Let me figure out what I'm going to say. No, it's okay. Regardless of design intent, we know that any change will be perceived as a buff or nerf. So that is accounted for here. Like basically, we're making the change and we're saying it is a tiny bit too good. We think that Rally is really supposed to be a slow speed effect, and it's we kind of maybe made a bit of a mistake having this be a fast kind of card. Especially because it can actually just be very confusing for new players. Like, wait, like I can cast this now? That doesn't make any sense. I already have the attack token and stuff like that. But in addition to that, it can be pretty punishing when used in response to a spell. Yeah. Because it kind of denies that extra action for your opponent to play another blocker. So it's pretty much a quality of life change. Well, I shouldn't have said that because it's really, it won't be perceived that way. I'm kind of getting tongue-tied here, but the idea is like, yeah, it is a nerf, but we basically wanted to make this change in the past. But given the change we've made in Demacia, we didn't really want to like have this perception of this card being like, nerfed while other stuff is being nerfed. So we're doing it now. You know, we're making a lot of nerfs in this patch, so Demacia probably is going to still end up really benefiting heavily from this patch, I'm sure. So this is a really good time to make this change that we wanted to make, just to make the card make more sense and be a bit more intuitive for players.
Yeah, I was going to mention the word intuitive. That's the, I think, what defines it. I think especially like when in the first, maybe after the full release of the game, or maybe even closed beta. It was closed beta when the elusives meta was very rampant, like at the beginning, with a Fiora decks in some cases, and just the spell-based, elusive deck, even with Braum at the beginning. Once people started adding in Relentless Pursuit, a week later, I, saw a video or saw something where someone was using it on the same attack turn, and I was really confused. Because it doesn't seem like an intuitive thing, like you mentioned. So it took me like a week to actually like see that and then process it. I think it just makes, it's much more intuitive having it this way and making it clear that you can get the attack token again later after attacking. Yeah,
I forgot to mention, but just to jump in really fast, like you pretty much, I play Relentless Pursuit a lot, and you almost always cast it at slow speed, just to be clear. Like, I don't know, it's probably like, sometimes you do it during combat, but it doesn't make a difference really, which is obviously just weird in general. But yeah, it's like, so this change is not like a huge nerf or anything, but yeah.
Well, I do think it is a pretty big nerf, especially like if you have like a more specialized sort of like rally deck, with Zed. And I feel like what you mentioned earlier, being able to react to it to like a spell, a lot of times that puts you in like this sort of like checkmate position, right? Like they're like, okay, I just because I went for the spell, now I can't set up my blocker, and I'm like, it feels like you're sort of like ambushing your opponent with it. I will miss that about it, but I do agree that Pursuit has been a suspect card for me for a while. Like it feels sometimes it doesn't do anything because it's completely reliant on your board state. But if you reach a certain point, it feels extremely powerful, and being able to go for this, like being able to go for the attack and drop the Relentless Pursuit, only giving your opponent one potential play before you unleash an attack again, is also really strong. So definitely a sizable nerf, but I think you guys are right in the sense that most people will not really notice the difference with it. And it's fine in that sense. It's a nerf that it's okay for it to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, like we do think it's warranted, regardless of all the intuitiveness and stuff like that. So,
and I think also when you usually attack a lot of times, because in most games after an attack, your opponent attacks, you immediately go into a sensation of safety. Like, okay, you attack, that's it. I'm not going to die this turn. But having a rally effect, normally being played as slow is kind of a surprise after the fact, because you maybe use mana to do, commit a lot of mana to one big unit or one big play, not thinking there's a chance for a rally effect. In some decks, you just don't expect it. So I think that just is why Pursuit is also just uses slow speed. It's more of a surprise after your initial attack, and then you capitalize on the fact your opponent just wasted all his mana and can't react. So I think on all counts, it's just much more intuitive having it at slow speed anyway. The next card we're looking at is going to be Arena Bookie, which MegaMogwai is very happy about, it seems. The cost goes down from 3 to 2, and the health goes up from 1 to 2. So a pretty nice buff overall, I think.
Yeah, for this one, we're oops. Sorry about that. That's my normal alarm when I'm supposed to wake up normally at 9:30.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, the Arena Bookie is sort of a situation where, if you guys haven't noticed, we really focus on not just explicitly stripping power away from regions. Especially, we want to add it back in synergy cards when we can. And with some of the nerfs to other Noxus 2 drops, I think that this is a really good time to sort of bolster the discard, more synergy archetype, makes this card curve out better with Draven. It just gives you more options in the discard deck to sort of get rolling early. And hey, maybe there's like non-discard decks that can now use this as a value engine of some sort, like a Shroom deck even or something like that. I don't know. I don't want to prescribe what players should do, but basically, I'm sure that now this change it's just clean. We think that this will help Noxus out in the wake of some of its nerfs that it's getting.
This is one of the most significant buffs I think I've seen from you guys in a while. This is a huge buff to the card. Like, the card, not only is it going up in health, it's reducing in cost by 1. For a low. I think this is just a testament of I believe Arena Bookie has been tremendously understated for a long time. And as the expansion has released and naturally the power level has risen a little bit, it got left behind even more, especially with the introductions of Misfortune, Make It Rain, the Twisted Fate. That 1 health is harder to really justify in this game for a card that's supposed to stick around for a while, right? I have a lot of experience with Arena Bookie recently because I made this really fun deck, which was basically Noxus and Ionia. It combined Draven and the new revamped Ren Shadowblade, and the idea was I would build up these cheap axes and these Shadow Fiends, and I would have Arena Bookie just cycle these cards out. And there were actually a lot of games in which I got lucky and my opponent didn't draw any of their pings, and this little guy just stuck around and he netted me tremendous value, right? I was able to get +3, +4 card advantage off of him pretty much, even though it's not technically that, but you are kind of dropping technically useless stuff in the process, right? And I was like, man, I just wish this guy was more resilient. I wish he had 1 more health or he was cheaper, something like that, because unfortunately, the majority of the time, he would just get very easily wiped out, right? So the fact that he's a 2-mana 2/2 now is, like I said, one of the biggest buffs I've seen, and I am really looking forward to trying out that sort of archetype and maybe messing around with that mushroom idea that you just threw out there as well. Why not? Really like this card. I like cards like this that basically provide you with more value the longer they live, right? And I really like that aspect of Noxus as a region, right? One of my biggest frustrations with the way the metagame shaped out this time around is that Noxus did become the most powerful region technically, but it did so, only through its direct damage ways. There's a lot more Noxus has to offer. Even beyond the discard synergies. I'm a big fan of Swain decks as well, and Swain is not doing too bad right now, but he is a little bit overshadowed by all the overwhelm and direct damage available to region. And I like this other side of Noxus to be more prevalent, and I think this is a great step in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's nice to see a kind of a synergy driven change and trying to make Noxus not only be certain key units like Basilisk Rider, like Crimson Disciple, kind of carrying the whole archetype, and trying to see more of a synergy related, because Overwhelm was something that it is kind of an archetype, but still it's half and half now in the harrowing deck that exists in the current meta.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be nice to see as well. I mean, Noxus, at least with the surveys I've been doing, has been it's been considered the best faction at the moment, the strongest faction, but the archetype and kind of the thematic satisfaction hasn't really changed much. It's still on the lower spectrum. So I think trying to get Noxus that rating, especially to try and the perception of people with being happy playing Noxus and being happy with the identity of it, I think is cool. I think this is definitely a step in that direction for sure. Before we move on to the next card, though, we're going to do a quick magic trick and be right back.
All right, we're back, and we got your boy awake finally. Hello.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm good now. We're all good.
So good to have you, Swim, join us. We're going to jump right where we left off. So Swim, unfortunately, has missed out on a bit of the patch notes, but still a lot to go and a lot to talk about still. We just talked about Arena Bookie, one of the first changes, looking at the Noxus cards overall. And the next change is Basilisk Rider was just buffed in the last patch, similar to Braum, and now is going back a tiny bit, the power from 5 down to 4.
Yeah, so for this change, we actually like the fact that we kind of overwhelmed decks are now a thing. Like, there's more options for Noxus players that can play with Allegiance. But we did see sort of the easy red flag for us is when a deck both has high win rate and high play rate at the same time. So we wanted to make sure we made some adjustments that made sense. Here we're just reducing the Basilisk Rider down. We don't want to do a full revert because we're happy to see these new overwhelmed decks, but we think the potency is just a bit too high.
I definitely did not see, like, I mentioned this before, like, we got recording as well. Like, I did not expect the Basilisk Rider to be as dominant as it's been. Like, when I first saw the change alongside Darius, I thought it was kind of cute because Basilisk Rider was always deemed as the worst Allegiance unit. So sometimes it's hard. It's very easy to overlook just how big of a difference a +1/+1 on the stat line can do. And I definitely think one of the biggest strengths of this card, at least its current version of it, is the 4 health. The fact that it's keeping that is going to be very relevant. There's a lot of scenarios in which this card can live on 1. You can Noxian Fervor it and still keep it alive. And with that Overwhelm keyword, all you need is 1 health to get another hit off on the opponent. And it can lead to pretty much irredeemable damage. So this is definitely a big hit. But ultimately, I still think the card will be playable. Though I'm not really sure anymore, man. It should be a simple case with Basilisk Rider, but I haven't really gotten it right with this card. So I'm gonna say it's still gonna be pretty decent, but it's definitely gonna be impactful.
Yeah, I feel literally I say everything Mogwai just said. Like, I also underrated the card. I was in the same exact camp where I was like, oh, I didn't think it would be actually that good of a card. It exploded, and now I'm also concerned that it might still be decent.
I think the biggest thing with the change is that it kind of put the idea of overwhelmed decks being a viable thing. Like, it created the archetype in the mind of the player base, and now even if you were making it, reverting it in a way, not completely but partially, it's still, once you've opened up that opportunity, now people can still have the idea of it being an archetype and trying to build this, maybe in a different way, but still being able to build into Allegiance with Noxus. So I think that's the biggest thing, and making it a bit, weaker now is still going to be. It's going to be in a positive spot, I think, just not as impressive as we've seen this past patch with the Hero Index as well. Even bigger change, though, coming up for Noxus. I think the big unit, the past patch, kind of the star of the show, has been Crimson Disciple in many, many decks. And it is seeing a pretty important change to its text. So before it used to do 2 damage pings every time it survived damage. And now the new text, it's doing 1 damage pings only.
Yeah, so Crimson Disciple was just doing way too much work as a 2-drop that was like both the best card you could possibly play on turn 2, but then also scaling really well into the late game, which is obviously kind of a double-edged sword there. We've avoided making this change in the past, and maybe we should have when we made the rearguard change. The reasoning is that this is a really synergistic card. Like, you can create it off of the Crimson unit that creates Crimson cards, and it's really good with Vlad. So we really wanted to preserve that synergy, but it's becoming very clear that this is kind of a problem card with the amount of damage output it gives, which often is like similar to Elusive in a way, where you're literally dealing damage to their Nexus without ever connecting. It also does a very good job of like counteracting cards that should be good against aggro, like Make It Rain and Withering Wail, where it just basically provides a card that is going to deal you a ton of damage over time. It's really, really hard to counter, and it has high health. And it's just frankly way too good for us to let it continue to be this strong. So we are reducing the damage output from 2 to 1.
Yeah, and this is going to be a pretty big nerf to the card. I mean, I'm curious, all of you guys actually, do you expect it to still be like a mainstay in aggro decks? Because I think it might actually start dropping off.
It's hard to say, but it's definitely a tremendous nerf. Every single time this card would receive damage, now it's dealing half. This is, it doesn't take much math to realize how big of a difference in damage output is going to lead to. Now, before, especially one of the strong things about Crimson Disciple was her interaction with Transfusion naturally. The fact that it happened at burst speed allowed you to potentially finish off your opponent without any sort of interaction at that stage, and it's huge. Like now, all of a sudden, instead of like a Transfusion into a Demolitionist dealing a total of 6 damage, we're talking about what, a total of 4? So that, in aggro terms, that goes a long way. I don't know if this will be a staple anymore. It's definitely, this is one of the changes that it's a bit bittersweet, because I was a defender of Crimson Disciple in the past. I really like her as a synergy component to, Crimson decks, any sort of like self-harm strategy, but it just reached a point in which the card was just so good that it would fit any sort of like aggro build, and it was basically, I would say it was pretty much a staple for the vast majority of Noxus decks, period. The Crimson Disciple Transfusion package is just too efficient not to run. And now it's hard to say, but there's no way, like, it will stop being a staple. There's no way it doesn't. Like, this is too big of a nerf for that not to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a staple of just like Nox aggro, but like aggro.
Everything.
Because every aggro had to run Nox, and now it'll be interesting seeing if aggro can even survive.
Especially seeing when Demolitions came into the game, you just saw elusive decks change from just elusive. They just throw in this Noxus package and like retreat, and then you just start playing into a very weird and different, as elusive was played the past 6 months before that, which was always just combat, and now it was kind of different with more going back to hand and playing again, and these summon effects that were very, very strong on Disciple and Demolitionist, for example. I think it is a big change, obviously, but the fact that Demolitionist isn't being changed and the fact that that synergy is still, it goes down from 4 damage to 3, is still a big chunk of burst. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it definitely allows for more creativity in those two mana slot for aggro decks, and it's not 100% just auto play Demolitionist and Disciple. It will be weaker, but that being said, when Burn was nerfed, the original PNZ Burn from 2 or 3 patches ago, everyone thought like there were huge nerfs, and then it just evolved into something different, and I think that's going to continue happening. Aggro will still exist in a different shell, but it may be a bit weaker, that's true, but I think it was very strong this last patch. So I'm pretty happy, I think, with it being a bit weaker. Talking about aggro and talking about, Noxus still, Grenadier also gets a bit of a nerf here. The health goes up from 1 to 2, so it has much more survivability, and it is, a decently statted 2-drop now at 3/2. But the old text, similarly to Disciple, drops down from deal 2 damage to the enemy nexus down to deal 1 to the enemy nexus.
All right, before anything, I just want to make use of the fact that we have 2 Americans in this call. And I want to have you guys help me clarify how you pronounce this card, because
Grenadier.
Grenadier?
Yeah,
it's not Grenadier. It's not Grenadier.
Grenadier.
It's not.
My Twitch chat lied to me then. But god damn it. Okay,
yeah, well, it's grenade.
Dude,
so it's actually like reasonable that you think that.
Yeah, that's why I thought. No, that's why I thought. And he's a dude holding 2 grenades. So
yeah.
Grenadier, right? Okay, Grenadier.
Yeah. He reminds me of that guy from the second Lord of the Rings movie that like blows up the wall. That's what I always think of. Yeah.
The slow motion, 10-second, just running with a grenade.
All right, now I know. Okay, we can continue. All right, so take it away.
Yeah. Oh, so you already explained the change. So cool. Yeah. So this one is similar to the Crimson Disciple change, where some of these units just provide like really good on-curve plays, and then are oftentimes very crushing in the late game as well, since they just close out the game. For the Grenadier specifically, like it's weird because Grenadier in a vacuum is kind of just a bad card. Like it's a 3/1. It can be very exploitable. But when we have a ton of other Nexus damage, and then you have Overwhelm, and then you have like the Harrowing and stuff like that just kind of makes those trades always in your favor. Because if you can trade any cards for it, you're just up 2 free damage basically. We think that just adds up and creates some of that uninteractability that we don't love, where it's like, yeah, you can sort of deal with it with removal, but it's just always gonna just put that extra damage. So this is like an adjustment where, yeah, for this card, unlike Disciple, we are giving it a health compensation change to just make it a bit different. I think this is a bit healthier, and yeah, of course, there will be situations where it's actually better, like you'll get around Static Shock and stuff like that. So this is sort of a change that, yeah, we're trying to make it more healthy by pulling away that just straight up sort of smork face damage situation and making it more of a consistent kind of card.
I really like. Sorry, go.
Oh no. Oh please.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead.
See how we're all gentlemen here. No, I just like I want to point out that I really like that you mentioned the fact that in a vacuum the card itself is nothing special. Like I think we can all agree on this. I'm gonna use a very, very weird analogy, but it's all I got. It's all I can come up with. Basically, A Bug's Life, like the ants, right? That's like the Noxus problem. Like, bear with me, okay? So there's a scene that I really like, all right, with the grasshoppers and like a bar with the almonds. I don't know if you guys remember it. They're making fun of the ants, right? Like individually, the ants don't really represent anything, but then the guy just like lets the almonds like just drop and kill them all to kind of like make the point that, you know, union is what makes strength, and that's basically the problem with Noxus. Like what I'm getting as Legion Grenadier, there we go.
Nice.
Thank you. Is not really a good card actually. I think power level wise, comparing it to other cards, it's perhaps even a little bit underpowered. But because it guarantees that you at the very least deal 2 damage to the opposing Nexus. All these direct damage effects, they add up and they just become this, you know, monstrosity of direct damage that Noxus is, right? So I think I love this change just as much as the Crimson Disciple change, but it really does point out the problem within Noxus as a region right now, in that I feel like every single time when they design new cards that deal direct damage, there's this line that we are very close to, and it's very easy to cross again, right? And I think I think it's going to be definitely a challenge moving forward from a design perspective to deal with this problem, because I think that's the thing, right? We have 20 health Nexus in this game, and when you have too many components deal direct damage, it just leads to these like very fast-paced, non-interactive games. And I think nerfing this is a very good sign of that, but it's just important to look at it through that perspective. Like a lot of times it's not just one card is just overpowered and we have to nerf it because of that. It's also the environment it's in, right? And I love this change because of that. I think it was just as important as the Crimson Disciple one, in my opinion.
I'm actually, you know, obviously with these things you really have to wait to see how they play out, but I'm a little concerned that this might be an over nerf considering some of the other changes. Because of course both Basilisk Rider and Disciple are coming down in really major ways. And you know, obviously the rest of the changes I haven't even looked at yet. The rest of the changes down below are going to dictate, you know, how the meta might shape out. But I think, like, you know, we've seen so much how like one small tweak can really like impact an entire archetype. You know, this is the 3rd nerf to the Noxus deck. And I actually quite liked the play patterns that Grenadier created before. There's actually a lot of like matchups where you had to mulligan Grenadier because the 1 health was too bad. Like a 2 mana 3/1 is a fairly unique stat line that makes you think in some specific ways, both as the user and the, you know, defender against it. So I don't know. I'm very I'm interested to see like how the rest of the, like, you know, changes might impact that, because Noxus aggro might just feel like too weak.
We were discussing with buffs and nerfs earlier before you joined how when you pair up certain buffs and nerfs to this you know, similar archetype or a single archetype, like we saw with Basilisk Rider and Harrowing last patch, then it doesn't seem like much. But then when you start, you know, actually putting into effect, then all of a sudden the deck creates itself, and it's a very, very strong deck. So yeah, I agree it is a possibility that it is an over nerf and maybe it becomes too bad. But with the original PNZ burn, I thought the same when certain, you know, the Boom Crew rookie changes happened, and then the deck just evolved. And I mean, Aggro is still here and still very strong.
Yeah,
and I think there are still many tools that you can build around. It will be weaker, sure, but I think weaker to the extent it should be. You know, I think it was a bit oppressive this last patch, and it'll find its spot in countering very slow decks and punishing very slow decks, but still maybe losing out to more mid-ranging decks and not being able to race them in time. That being said, we'll see this month how it affects, and then I think next patch or next episode we'll discuss this again for sure.
I'm obviously biased. I'm not the biggest fan of aggro playstyles, even though obviously I do acknowledge the necessity of aggro having some sort of position in a meta, right? But I personally believe this card was it's hard to express this, right? Because it's not that it was necessarily a bigger problem than Crimson Disciple, but I dislike this card more than Crimson Disciple, because what I don't like about this card was the close to inevitability that it had in going off, right? Like there are exceptions, like you could devour it, for example, but barring very limited cards that could react to this, when this card comes down, it's like you are taking 2 damage at the very least. And I felt like that took away. Well, it is true, like you pointed out, there are matchups in which you don't really want to have the Legion Grenadier, because you know the 1 health, you know, the Vile Feast against Shadow Isles, or if you're facing Bilgewater, you're worried about Make It Rain, really nullifying it. But for the most part, in most matchups, this thing just came down and it just represented a secure amount of damage going onto it. It just counted kind of like as a direct Mystic Shot with a body that would be threatening damage on its own. And I just don't think that's healthy. I don't think... I definitely... If I had to choose... This sounds crazy, but if I had to choose between Crimson Disciple and this card, I would have preferred them tackle this card. Because at least Disciple required other cards to be combined with it, even though it was inherently more powerful as a card in general, right? I don't know. I just don't like this guy, basically. That's what I'm trying to say, and I'm happy it got changed.
I think you got the point across. But that is the last of the Noxus changes, so we're not gonna pummel them down too much. That is the last change. We'll see how it pans out in this patch, the next month or so, and we'll definitely revisit it, I think, in the next episode of Progress Day. But moving on, we're going to be seeing a few changes to the discard archetype. Sump Dredger, its cost is going up from 2 to 3. The old text used to be to play me, discard 1, and now the new text is to play me, discard 1, and draw 1.
This is... Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just before you go, I just wanted to point out, this is interesting because when you guys mentioned this in the sort of watch list that you did in the most recent patch, right? Like that you were going to be changing these cards.
Preview.
The preview. When I read the preview, I don't know why I thought you guys were talking about the actual discard outlets, like the Flame Chomper, and then I'm like, how are they gonna change those cards? Like you can only really do so much with that, right? But I just want to say I find this really interesting that you chose to switch it up with these. So I just wanted to mention that.
Oh yeah, no problem. Unfortunately, changing those is very, very hard because the idea that it can always be free really limits the amount of a 1/1 is anything more than that is crazy. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, so for these, I'm going to talk about both Sump Dredger and Zana Urchin. They both got that text that Panda was saying. And the idea here is, like I said before, when we're looking at making changes and we were nerfing, Piltover through Heimerdinger and Flash changes, we really want to make sure that we are giving, what is the player getting, right? Are they getting common buffs? Is there something new that they can try out they couldn't get before? So here we're making the discard deck just a bit less all in and a bit more of the sort of rummage, slot bot, Jinx style, where you're just continuing to kind of flow through your deck. This actually kind of changes the archetype from a sort of at least when you're playing with these cards, as opposed to an all-in deck, to more of a value deck. And hey, maybe even Zonite Urchin, you can play it in more combo-oriented decks now that you get the card right away and whatnot. So yeah, that's the general idea around these changes.
And it makes it much less of a just a tempo-based deck of trying to spam units quickly, which I think. We could see from play rates and just overall the archetype itself wasn't very prevalent at all, and especially Jinx not finding any kind of a home with that archetype, to now more of a draw-based deck, more with Twisted Fate or Slapbot, like you said, and kind of merging both of those to make something a bit more cohesive, I think.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a point that I missed, which is basically like Jinx has this quest to empty your hand, right? Which is like really awesome when you have Jinx. But like when you don't have Jinx, the strategy just feels bad. It's like, well, I just emptied my hand, but I have no actual payoff.
Yeah.
So this is sort of making those kind of in-betweener games feel a bit better.
Yeah, like you can drop one of these two, and as you, in case newer players are watching, like if you, for example, were to drop this new version of the Zonat Urkin, and you have one card left in your hand and a Jinx on the board, as you discard this card, Jinx will level up, but then you will draw a card, which means you're not left empty-handed, which is one of the major downsides to playing Jinx, right? Like, especially, you know, the problem that exists already, which is the opponent being able to remove Jinx, which does leave you pretty wide open as well. Regarding these two cards, I could definitely see the Zonat Urkin just being a straight-up buff, since you're basically drawing the card immediately. Regarding the Dredger, it's really interesting because this is, like, going from 2 mana to 3 mana is really, really impactful, but obviously he is getting you a card, right? Like, he's drawing you a card. So basically here, what you're doing is you're paying 1 extra mana to get a card off of him. And, I don't know, that's very interesting to me.
It's huge, yeah. 1 mana for 1 card is something that you would always take.
Yeah.
Like this card and the archetype by extension just went from, you know, sort of like meme tier to something that's actually like really considerable. My only concern is, you know, as Steve pointed out, it might be like Jinx's position in these lists might end up feeling almost a little weird at times.
Yeah.
But these are like actual cards now all of a sudden. Like when you look at 1 mana to 1 card, you know, Avros and Sentry, a 1 mana 2/1 that has no effect is terrible, right? Shadow Assassin, you know, you compare it to like a 2 mana 2/2 elusive, it's like so much better. 1 mana for 1 card is huge.
And it's interesting to have like units that draw cards now as well for like Twisted Fate decks and like Slotbot decks. I think it adds like a lot more options for drawing, not just spells and kind of the usual card, you know, pilfered goods, obviously. So yeah, I think it's nice to see, and I think it's definitely gonna hopefully put discard in a bit better spot in terms of play rates and trying to find like an actual identity and an archetype for it. That being said, there is a slight nerf here to Petty Officer with Zonai Urchin, because you used to be able to just get the draw.
Because they always get it.
When I put Island Navigators or Petty Officers into like something sick, you know, I'm always somewhat tilted. So
Yeah.
Also it does change. It does change the Warden's Prey as well. You no longer will get a Zonai Urchin.
Ah, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Which was arguably one of the worst pulls as well. So indirect buff.
Yeah, there's a lot of 1-drops though, and yeah, we do think about that more for cards like Remembrance or Flash of Brilliance, where there's like a small pool of things you can hit.
Yeah.
As a design principle, as opposed to something where there's just a lot, because the constraints just are so tough there. But yeah, another thing I like, hopefully, about the Zonai Urchin is like, it's weird that Piltover Zon basically doesn't have a 1 mana unit that people play.
Yeah.
So like literally, that's like an only region maybe that doesn't. So hopefully that sees some more play.
Yeah, but just something to keep in mind. Obviously, some of these cards have changes that are not immediately, you know, noticeable, but then you notice later on. Moving on from the discard package with Some Treasure and Zonai Urchin, Shadow Assassin is receiving a nerf here, going down from 2 power to 1 power.
Oh boy!
It isn't necessarily a card that has been, you know, very oppressive or super talked about in the last few patches after that, you know, initial big elusive, you know, meta. But it's always been a card that's always been there, has always been reliable, has always had, you know, card draw, and has, you know, obviously been amazing for Ionia-based decks that go for longer games and more control and that need more options. So, big change here. Do you want to go through kind of the thoughts?
Yeah, there's a whole saga here, so I'll try to keep it concise. So this card was on the watch list in the past, which basically meant like we were working on figuring out a change. We tried this change, but it honestly felt pretty anemic, so we didn't end up going with it. We tried 2/1, but that was weird because that made it just kind of like polarized. They made it like worse against some archetypes, but still just the same most of the time. And then we tried 4 mana, which just didn't feel like it was satisfying for elusive decks or control decks. So we didn't change it. We made the call like, you know what, let's not change it and leave it be. I think as you see with like another change down, I won't spoil it, I guess, since Panda keeps saying spoilers when I spoil stuff. For people who are just seeing the patch list the first time as we talk about them, basically we kind of see both elusives and control Ionia decks, like namely Karma, but we do see like Vi Heimer or even like Vi Ezreal with Ionia, like kind of utilize these cards to be very, very consistent. Which is the problem. And it's basically an auto include in every Ionia deck, which isn't definitely not ideal. I think it's okay for some cards to live there, but the power level of the card was just way too high. Specifically, the callouts for Shadow Assassin is like it lets elusive strategies have a lot more power and resilience. Like the idea that you can actually beat an elusive deck by like killing their units a lot and interacting with challenges and stuff is a lot harder to do when your opponent can play Shadow Assassins. Maybe they even bounce a Shadow Assassin, and it's also pushing a lot of damage. But defensively, it also is like a reasonable blocker if you ever get to trade with a 2-drop. Like Swim said, 1 mana for 1 card is like amazing. Like you're like, okay, this is going really well. So this change is pretty geared towards, opening Ionia up and saying, hey, let's take away some of the core aspects of it. But specifically, we think that this card overperforms in elusive decks and then slow controlling decks, where it does give you some free wins, even in non-elusive decks, where you draw 2 Shadow Assassins, 4 damage a turn, you're on card advantage. So sorry, I'll keep it short since there's so much more to say, but that's basically like the gist of why we're making the change.
Swim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like Steve said, it was on the watch list. God, that was like 5 patches ago or something. It was a long time ago. And yeah, no, I mean, it's a change that's been a long time coming. Like you saw all 3 of our faces, like when we were looking at this, and just like, it's just like, it's not just like, oh, thank God. It's like, oh, it's about time. It's been so long. Like, Mogwai, you like, that was on your face. Like, oh, man. I don't know. What do you think, buddy?
I mean, yeah, it's nothing to add, really. Like, that's exactly what was going through my mind. Like, it's just, it feels like forever ago when they knew that this thing was, it's not like, oppressive is definitely not the word. It's just like overrepresented. It's hard to find an Ionia deck. Now it's more common than before, but the vast majority of Ionia decks still run this as a bit of a staple. And I think to a certain degree, obviously, like, individual cases are individual cases, but mostly cards that are just like staples in any deck are just worthy to be looked at the very least. And I don't know, like, this change is this card like are you guys gonna play this card now? Like I actually
I don't. Yeah, I think that like I might play it in decks that have Windfare Hatchling probably, and then it's like, I don't know if I'll play it in like your Yasuo decks or like your Karma decks even. I don't think I will play it personally, but
yeah, no, but in elusive, especially with cards like Fury of the North and the likes, like just having that body that replaces itself is still good. But yeah, definitely will not be playing this in any deck that's not an elusive deck, in my opinion. I'm not even sure. Like, I mean, you could still potentially justify this in a Heimerdinger deck potentially, as it does still give you a free blocker in a way. Well, free, like at least card advantage wise. But pretty sizable nerf, especially for a unit that's once it draws you a card, like the only thing that it's the card is providing you from that point on, for the most part, is that offensive pressure, right? As it is unblockable, so losing half of his attack is always gonna be just pretty massive. So yeah, I mean, she had it coming, but well, we'll see if she still sees play. And honestly, I welcome a little bit of change and people venturing into other Ionia options instead.
I think it did a bit too much in terms of being consistent, reliable, and also serving, in the early to mid game with like Heimerdeck, especially, for example, as a blocker, and also just 2 damage pings. You're already going down to 16 after a few turns, so it kind of gave you a big head start when you finally had the elusive turn for Heimer. So I think it's an okay change. I mean, we'll see some play still. I think the card draw aspect is in some decks going to be very viable, but yeah, it is a big nerf, that has to be said. But I think long overdue as well. I think this card alongside Glimpse, and Glimpse not so much now because there are so many more card draw options. I think it's part of why Shadow Assassin isn't as prevalent now as it was before, because a lot more cards got added with the last expansion. Were kind of the cards back then that were like never changed, always on the watch list, and always felt like very, very strong cards. Sticking with Ionia, we're going to see a change to Steel Tempest. The cost goes down from 3 to 2. So all of a sudden, it becomes a very, very efficient way of kind of stopping damage with its stun effect. And also that, inherently is also going to change and buff Yasuo because his signature card is Steel Tempest, of
That's
course.
super cheap, boy. That's very
Yeah,
nice.
so
I can see this grin on Mogwai's face.
Yeah, so this change, like, I feel like I keep repeating myself, but like it's really important to us, especially when we're changing like the 2 most played potentially cards in Ionia. We really want to make sure that players have something to still play around with. Maybe they change up the builds of the deck, create some diversity, and if the buffs don't end up being enough, that's still okay, I think. For this change specifically, we want, like, since we're changing, I don't know if I should call it out or not, but the change that we'll go over in the future, it's like we still want Ionia controlling decks to have that tool. And we do find that Yasuo, I guess the way I put it is he kind of like dies for Ionia's sins, which is like hilariously apt to his lore, where like when Mentor and Deny and another card in this patch, secret card, gets changed, like Yasuo's pretty sad. Also, like for the kind of Karma controlling decks, we're seeing some pretty significant nerfs to some of their tools. So this is just kind of a new card that we think, yeah, this is pushing the efficiency on this card, but we think that this is like much fairer than some of the other stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, the big comparison point for this card is like Flash Freeze, which is just basically like a much better version than it already. This will give more. I don't know why I'm talking so much about a small change, but yeah, I mean, we're thinking in terms of like, what does the player get? Well, to control Ionia decks, get anything? Can they still operate in the future? Is Yasuo? It's just some of the complexities we deal with. Like Yasuo's getting nerfed a lot. Like, how do we deal with that? So that's kind of the reasoning behind this change.
I like that reasoning a lot. Like we're to mention it shortly, but Will of Ionia with the nerf, I like that you guys are looking to give Ionia players other tools, and I think this is actually at least in a vacuum it feels very fair, especially comparing it. I like a very straightforward comparison is to Concussive Palm. Like with Concussive Palm, you are paying 2 more mana to be able to play the card at any point, because one of the biggest downsides to Steel Tempest that people don't realize is the fact that it's very limited to when you can play it, right? You only can play it to an attacking, so you can't use the card when you're attacking, for example. So you're paying 2 more mana to be able to play it whenever you want to, and to get a 3/2 body, right? I think that's fair. I think a 2 mana Steel Tempest in a vacuum, like I said, is fair. It still feels very cheap. Like, for 2 mana, you're gonna be able to just deny an attack. That's really strong, right? I can't deny that. So, because the environment also matters, right? But yeah, it's interesting.
Dwim, any thoughts?
It's gonna be. I'm looking at this card, and I think this could be quite good.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see it. Basically, I'm comparing it in my head to like Health Potion. You've got like your eyes and your claws, and you're trying to spam a bunch of cheap spells, stay alive. You're paying 2 instead of 1, and you're getting more than 3 health pretty much almost always. I think that it's definitely gonna be a card that could exist on the competitive level. There's a chance that it could be really toxic, actually. I'm not sure, but I think for the most part it's right around where it wants to be.
I'm happy it happened though, because it's because the Palm came and just completely took the spotlight from this card. Like, this card just became pretty much irrelevant, even in Yasuo decks. So if Yasuo's signature card is not even seen play in Yasuo decks, I think it's okay to give it a bit of a boost.
Yeah, and I think it just makes sense with Ionia, what Ionia wants to do as well with stalling and going to late game with a lot of its champions. So, and I mean, with Yasuo it's a bit different, but just even with just Karma and Heimer based decks, having the chance to slow down the game and stall out so you get those big power plays at the end, it just makes a lot of sense. And it's, like Swim said, very cheap, has a lot of synergies with Eye of the Dragon and a lot of different cards as well. So I think it's hard to assess exactly how impactful it'll be just right now. You have to really think on it and kind of see how it evolves in the meta naturally, but I think it could be a card that sees a lot of play in a lot of very different archetypes as well for Ionia.
There are some matchups in which it's going to be brutal, like absolutely brutal. Some matchups in which for 2 mana just denying everything for the opponent. It's gonna be crazy.
And if it does see play, we're pretty happy. I think one thing that we're doing a little bit different in this patch, where oftentimes we like make make buffs that we can, but I think we're being a bit more purposeful in this patch. Hopefully that shows where it's like we're making less buffs this time, but we're really buffing cards that we think maybe they'll put them into playability. And if something becomes a little bit too good, like a Basilisk Rider, so to speak, we always have the opportunity to rein back on it in the future. I think Mogwai touched that on like how we ship Braum a little hot. I think that we're kind of moving, at least with this patch, the mentality of like, hey, let's make more meaningful changes. So yeah,
I really like that. I think that's a great step in the right direction. It's like I've seen so many Reddit posts that are just like, oh, thank God Riot isn't over nerfing things. And I mean, I come from like Hearthstone partially, and I've seen Blizzard like crazy over nerf things, but man, sometimes there's been a couple of patches where it's like none of the changes do anything, and Reddit's like, oh, thank God Riot's not over nerfing things, and I'm just like, oh, God. Like,
yeah, it can be tough as a competitive player. Yeah. It can be.
Yeah.
So moving forward, we have yet another Ionia change, River Shaper, a card that hasn't seen too much play in the past few months.
In the best ever.
Change. Its health is going up from 1 to 2, so much more survivability, and just gonna maybe see a bit more play.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been talking about the same concept a lot. Like we're taking Shadow Assassin, like core 3-drop to Ionia. Like, oh, is there anything we can give these decks back? River Shaper, hopefully more synergy driven. Like you have to strike to get the card. Maybe makes Shen or Key Guardian or whatever you're doing a little bit more powerful. If it, hopefully it's just giving another option for a synergy. Sorry, I don't have great reasoning behind this, other than we think that it'll just make it easier for strike-based Ionia decks.
Plus, this card became even worse when the standalone nerf happened, in my opinion. Because before that was pretty much this card's home, like Fiora, sort of like spell-driven standalone decks, right? Before Zed Fiora just kind of like overtook that. But
I was having dreams about Zed Fiora, Zed standalone. Like that's why I couldn't wake up in time for this. I was like sleeping.
Makes sense.
And I was just like,
I've dreamt with that too.
Standalone Zed. Oh, I miss it. And you took that away from me, Steve.
There's been so many nerfs to that deck. I don't know. It's weird since it's one of the most frustrating decks players can encounter, especially new players.
Some people just want to. Some people just want to watch the world burn, man.
The deck isn't that good. Well, sorry, it's not like overpowering where it like needs all the changes, but it gets hit by a lot of other like efficient cards getting hit.
Yeah.
We'll see. Like I liked especially when I saw like early on as the game was released, there was this slight surge in Fiora Karma decks, and they ran River Shaper. They had a very high spell density, and I quite like those type of decks. And it would be nice to see River Shaper again. I am particularly fond of cards that generate you more and more value the longer they stay on the board. Like I like playing those sort of value engines, and this is a neat buff that hopefully will go a bit of a long way. So the next card though we're gonna talk about is the big one.
Yeah, so moving on, still in Ionia, and still probably one of the biggest changes this patch after King of Disciple, or maybe even the biggest looking at the broader scope of the meta in Runeterra.
he realized.
Just noticed it.
He realized.
Will of Ionia is getting nerfed and going from
yeah, I know.
What?
That's exactly what I went through. Yeah.
Yeah. So for this change, okay.
I just lost $100 on that bet. God damn it, Steve.
Oh, so yeah. So is this the time where I talk about the reasoning behind the change? Sorry. Breathe for a second.
Sorry, I'm good. Go ahead, man.
I'm glad that I didn't spoil the card when I was talking earlier. I thought I made it super obvious what was happening. Cool. So yeah, basically Will of Ionia just provides so much utility and power for a lot of decks. But the obvious use case of it kind of oppressing a lot of champions where you can bank spell mana, and then basically like your opponent plays a Tryndamere is the obvious example people say, and then for essentially like 1 mana plus 3 bank spell mana, you're just win the game basically. So we want to make it a bit less punishing towards like expensive champions and strategies in general. When I talked about this being a game health patch, hoping that this change kind of opens up more strategies. And we're hoping that this has a similar effect to kind of our deny change from 3 to 4. We're like, hey, now maybe with Concussive Palm and Steel Tempest, maybe Ionia decks play 1 or 2 Will of Ionias. I think that's a pretty good spot. Like it's still a pretty core interactive card, which is why we didn't love changing it in the first place, because it does, kind of do the things that we like about our game, where it's like, oh, it disrupts stuff like the Crimson Disciple combo without feeling bad. Now, like the raid is just going to be pretty poor on making those kind of interactions. But in general, we think that Will was just a bit too oppressive to a lot of strategies.
Yeah.
And specifically, we think that Control Ionia, like your big Karma decks, and then your Elusive decks, were just gaining way too much. And we just saw them just come back into the meta, no matter how many changes. Eventually, they'll come back into the meta. And this change is hopefully going to not prevent them completely, because of course, like now there's Steel Tempest and new cards coming out, but this will hopefully prevent them that never-ending cycle. And just force Ionia decks to, come on guys, just play with other cards, Try some other cards.
This is a change that I've been asking for quite some time, and I'm very excited for, but at the same time, it makes me a little bit nervous, because I personally believe this is the most meta-defining card in the game. I think everything, in a way, directly or indirectly revolves around it. And if this card all of a sudden starts dropping in usage, it could open, some sort of Pandora's box in a way, right? We could see. I think the implications could be huge, and it could lead to like some late game bombs being more prevalent, and that could change the game quite a bit, right? So I'm very like on the fence with like trying to predict what's gonna happen, because I honestly I don't know, and it makes me a little bit nervous, but I definitely think this have to happen, and I am excited for it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not really nervous. I think that the card is still going to be competitive. I really liked the comparison Steve made to Deny. That's actually, I've said that myself, because I've made literally multiple videos about Will of Ionia getting nerfed and why it's okay. And it's like, it basically, I anticipate the same exact cycle as Deny, where, it gets +1 mana, it still gets run, but it's no longer like an auto-include 3 of, and it still has its ability to keep things in check just fine, like exactly like Deny. Or like Vengeance, where it's like you just look at the quantity when you're in the deck builder, and it's going to be the same as Vengeance, where it's like, well, in some metas it's still going to be a 3 of in certain decks. In some metas it's a 1 of, some metas it's a 2 of. Some decks, some metas it's a 0 of. It's like perfectly healthy in terms of like its position to respond to meta threats. Like I think it's a great card for 5 mana.
Yeah, I do remember at first Deny when it was like changed, people were overreacting a little bit to it, like quite a bit. People were like, "Oh, now we have a control metagame for now and forever."
Brothers call.
Yeah,
you guys know what I deal with on the day-to-day.
So I could totally see it like that. I just can't help but worry a little bit, because it's the most important card in the game right now, I think.
Yeah, Mogwai, that's definitely like one of the reasons that we haven't changed it in the past, especially since we've been very didn't want to necessarily blow up the meta, but I think that players are now like really wanting just diversity and freshness, and we're trying to provide that a bit more.
As someone who really enjoys playing the deep archetype, I am not nervous at all. I am very happy about this change.
Dude, Clash of Brilliance, Heimerdinger, Will of Ionia.
This is my
birthday, man.
This is early Christmas.
Crazy,
the patch is patch.
In July.
I might actually add Nautilus to my deep deck now.
Nice. It's good. Well, that's exactly the kind of idea behind the change, right? Like, no, seriously.
Yeah.
Moving forward, obviously it's going to be a very impactful card, but we have 2 more changes. They're both obviously very connected, so I'm going to go through both of the changes, and then we can discuss them together. Golden Narwhal is changing its cost from 3 to 2, and its health also going down from 4 health to 3 health. And the Hunting Fleet is changing its cost from 5 to 4, and its stat line is changing from a 7/7 to a 6/6.
Yeah, so I feel like this change is so insignificant compared to like everything else we're talking about. But the idea here is we're just looking at like 2 common cards in Bilgewater that are just both on their own, like not really playable. And I don't know if this change, well, I don't want to say I don't know, but this change doesn't necessarily has a goal of making them awesome or anything, but just to give them some quality of life improvements to some of the less played cards in Bilgewater that attach to each other. Golden Narwhal as now is kind of a 2-mana 2/3 elusive. Obviously, it has vulnerable, which hopefully that gives it a bit more play in niche strategies. And then that kind of helps out with the hunting fleet, since the unit you're giving your opponent is a little bit worse now, since it has less health. And it'll be a 4-mana 6/6. So you get that awesome body. Of course, you're creating them a 2/3. So the idea is to just bump some of the less commonly played cards that were just in a spot that were just completely unviable into, potential expedition play, or maybe a niche sort of elusive deck can play with the Golden Narwhal.
I think that these cards are both, they've both been a little underrated, but also I actually think that there's a real chance that these changes might end up being fairly significant. I was actually just talking about Golden Narwhal on my stream yesterday, and I was explaining like this is actually an underrated card. Like I built a deck with ManUS, literally that we ran Golden Narwhal in it, unironically. Like it's not necessarily a bad card.
But what kind of deck was it? I'm curious.
An elusive deck, Mogwai.
I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. Stop making elusive deck, man. God damn it.
Oh, I'm gonna I was just about to mention this change heralds in my new maining of Bilgewater as my elusive. I'm just gonna start jamming Bilgewater elusives now, Fizz decks, Narwhal decks, slippery Wave Rider decks. There's so much to the idea of Bilgewater elusives that people have been pushing. Will of Ionia is 5 mana now. It's time for Bilge elusive, boys.
Okay.
What's the second region then?
I don't know. Ionia.
Oh, okay.
Maybe,
wait,
okay.
the way you said that as if you were cutting Ionia,
I know, I did. You're right. Well, okay. Either Froly Road or PNZ. I'll mess around.
Okay. Cool.
Options.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
And Hunting Fleet as well. As a 4/6/6, like I feel like there's a lot of room to just like use this card for value for stabilization. I think
it's interesting. Definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
It's very early.
The biggest downside of the card is like, so Hunting Fleet is categorically an offensive card. Like you want to be playing it on offensive turns because of the nature where it summons both of you units. And because it gives your opponent a vulnerable elusive, that rewards you. Both of those keywords reward the person attacking on the turn Hunting Fleet is being played. It's sort of like there was a Hungry Dragon at Hearthstone, and Hungry Dragon had this concept where it was good. It was partially bad because Summoning Sickness meant your opponent got to use it first. But if you use Hunting Fleet on your offensive turn, you get to use everything first. And that's really powerful. So if there was some kind of like Bilgewater sort of like aggressive mid-range deck, they could really use Hunting Fleet.
Mogwai, any thoughts on the changes?
I mean, I really can't add much more to that. I think a 4-mana 6/6. I mean, I've enjoyed playing the Crimson Awakener quite a bit in like the early stages of this patch. Before Braum and Anivia was established, and Braum Swain later down the line. Like I messed around with Braum Sejuani. And I definitely felt the benefits of playing like a very highly statted 4-drop in Awakener, right? So this is, well, it's a big downside. It's quite a bit of stats. I still think at this point though it kind of like shares the same problems with Crocolith. I mean, I don't think Crocolith is a bad card. There's a lot of decks in which I actually like Crocolith personally, but it also, like, a unit like this is just going to get chump blocked again and again really easily in most matchups, and that's definitely going to keep it away from highly competitive decks, but hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully this mid-range Bilgewater list is a potential, gem to be discovered, and I'll mess around with it.
With those two changes, though, that is the end of the actual balance changes in this patch note, and pretty soon going to be the end of this episode as well. We've gone for quite a while. Obviously, with most of these episodes where we discuss the balance notes, it goes pretty long. There's a lot to talk about. Just to quickly mention at the end, the personalization, there is a new board being added, an epic tier board, the first one, I believe you mentioned, Rubin. And it's going to have some very interesting interactive elements as well. So definitely looking forward to playing around with that.
I want to see what that looks like. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
And also a pretty new concept, deck bundle. So you guys are just basically putting fully pre-made decks on sale, basically.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it'll have 2 Gangplanks and 2 Sejuanis. So if you're like interested in those champions, it'll be like a pretty good deal. And then, you know, maybe you can make improvements to the deck itself as you play through.
I'm curious, what's the process of deciding exactly how these decks are built?
So I don't actually entirely know. Unfortunately, I know that Alex Lee, who was the set lead on Rising Tides, designed this deck. I think, you know, he took some player decks. Making these decks is tough because, sorry, I probably shouldn't be speaking about it because I don't know too much about it. But I think that the idea is like having an in for newer players to sort of like see a synergy theme, get good rate on like getting some new champions, and then also giving them a deck that sort of might not be like the most powerful deck, but is something that we really like the progression where you get a starter deck and you figure out, oh, I can make improvements as I get more cards. So
I think
that's the basic idea around it, but I don't exactly know what's going on there.
No, but I very much like it. I like that these decks are designed with that in mind. Just like making them, it's not easy to like make an efficient deck, but a deck that can also be improved, right? Like that's not really the approach you take towards deck building at all when you're trying to make a deck. So it must be an interesting process, right? But I like it, you know, like just a new player picks this up and it's like, okay, as they play more with it, you know what, I could use this card instead of this one, and it helps them pick up the game easier. Like if I was getting into a game, I would really, it's a card game, I would really appreciate like being able to take these decks and try to improve them instead of just having to like, because otherwise it's either just take a starter deck or whatever, or just go on YouTube and trying to search for pre-made decks that way. So yeah, I like it. That's basically it though, right? Like that's
yeah. That concludes the patch notes. So Mogwai, you can kind of take it away with your conclusions as usual.
All right, I mean, overall my impressions, I don't know about you guys, but I think this is a very, very exciting patch incoming. I think it's going to change the metagame significantly, like everything, most like
really significantly.
Very few, like I can't see like any of the top tier decks not being affected by this in some way or another. So really, really looking forward to this. I for one, like I said, I am biased. I'm not a big fan of the Noxus aggro archetype, and I want to see it burned. I'm looking forward to freeing from that and being able to build more mid-range decks, you know, without feeling so much pressure from the meta, right? And I'm really looking forward to. I'm not sure what I'll mess around with first. I'm very inclined to try out the Arena Bookie, you know, in its new form. I don't know if you saw that, Swim, but it's a 2-mana 2/2 now, so I'm really excited about that. And I also want to mess around with the Dredger as well. The more I think about the Some Dredger, it may become the new Shadow Assassin.
It's crazy.
You know?
It's
yeah,
really good.
It's a 4/3.
Yeah, we'll see where that lands, like more aggressive Piltover decks.
Yeah.
Excited for that.
I don't know. I'm thinking. So when I look at this patch, I see something that. So there's one other patch we've had in the past that this reminds me of, which is the one right before. Pretty much everyone. I know me and Mogwai both agree that we called it like the best meta in the game.
So you say the one before that or that one?
The patch that led to it, yeah. Which
I hope that's the case. I really hope that's the case.
So
I hope you're right.
I think the biggest reason for that is because in both patches, basically every deck in tier 1 just got nerfed. So everyone just kind of didn't know what to do, and it led to just a huge amount of diversity and viability, like experimentation for weeks, for like literally like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, like a really long time. And this is the second time we've seen that happen. I think we'll see that again.
I love that this is gonna happen like just before the new expansion as well.
Yeah,
it's gonna help keep things so fresh, and it's so needed. Really, really excited about that. Because as we're starting to get tired of like this new meta incoming, people finally solve it. We got new cards in a new region coming, so
yeah, we'll have spoilers, and you know, this patch especially, I've gotten a lot of feedback from players over time, and I'm hopefully moving it into a better spot where we feel like these are like kind of better patches. And if that's the case, then we can maybe see more nerfs than normal in the future, but we'll see about that, since I think our goal is in the nerf. I just wanted to thank you guys for having me because this was really awesome. Like, if you ever wanted me to do one of these, if you were doing patch notes, if you think that would be great, I'd be more than happy to join up for patch notes.
We'd love to have you, man. This was like very insightful.
Nice.
Like I said, I was very excited for this one specifically because, you know, we get to pick your brain. Like you're the guy. Like when I look at these notes, like I think of you, right? So
Cool.
it's awesome. It was great. I think this is made for a very interesting video. And hopefully you guys watching found it interesting as well and are looking forward to messing around with the new cards. Let me know in the comment section down below like what cards you're excited to play around with. And that's basically all I gotta say. If you guys have any last words, that sounded a bit weird, but
I'll briefly mention I did the survey again this month. The perception, if you want to check it out, Mogwai will hopefully this time remember to add it to the
I always
description.
remember. Come on, man.
And it's a bit, late to go over it now because it's been going. This episode has been really long already. But you guys can check it out and check out the results and just obviously always some interesting things to draw from that. I think so. For those that are used to going through it, just a quick reminder, you can check it out. And that's all from me, I think. Thanks, Rubin, for joining us. I think it was very insightful, and it's kind of like having the answer book, with you because you're going to the patch notes and you can, like Mogwai said, pick your brain and understand everything much better. So yeah, just thanks for joining us.
No problem. It was a blast.
Swim.
And,
Swim, say goodbye.
Last words.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any last words. Yeah. Thanks for coming, Steve. We should do this like every balance patch. Honestly, you want?
Yeah, I mean, I'm down. If you guys think that it's worth, like I'm in.
I think the community in particular would love it. I think just like people having this line of like,
I mean, who wouldn't like it? Honestly, like what I don't.
People just like. Communities don't like thinking of devs as like these like faceless shadow council. It's like it's so much better when they can kind of like just get an idea of what you guys think and like why you guys make the changes you do. That's why like the watch list is so good, and this is just a step past that. Mogwai, cool. you should do a thing where it's like top 5 comments we ask Steve on the next show or something like that. I don't know.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna improvise the hell out of that. All right, guys. Let me just any questions you have towards Steve in the comment section down below, and the most popular ones we'll get on to the next show for the next balance patch. All right, there we go. Improv. All right,
just repeat it what Swim said.
My idea.
I'm not sure.
All right, thank you guys for coming. For doing this. I found it very interesting, and I'm really excited for what's to come. And that's all I gotta say. So thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for daily content. Check out any of these fine gentlemen right here. All of their links and everything will be in the description down below, including the link to Panda's survey. I will not forget. I don't know why you even implied that. I've never forgotten. Fact. And we'll be back at it in a couple of weeks. So have a good one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you around.